So after World War II, as there is the battle between democratic governments and communist governments, we've talked a lot about what happened in Europe, but there's also a lot going on in Asia over near the Pacific. So we know that the Soviet Union and China are very, very communist countries. They're also very large countries and very powerful countries. So when we look at Korea and Vietnam, like Germany, both of these countries were divided after the war, with half of the country being communist and half of the country being free. So in Korea, it's North Korea and North Vietnam are communist, South Korea, South Vietnam are free. So the United States, they've said, we don't want to get into a war. We just got out of war, we don't want to get into a war. But we don't want communism to spread. So that's kind of their stance on it. And North Korea invades and attacks South Korea with the backing of the Soviet Union and China. So North Korea, they invaded because they wanted to unite Korea all together under communism. Well, Harry Truman is still president at this time, and he condemned it. He's like, why would you do that? Don't do that. Don't invade them. And so that invasion is what led to the beginning of the Korean War. So President Truman, he ordered General MacArthur to lead the U.S. military to support the United Nations effort. So since the UN has been formed, now the UN is declaring war, not necessarily the United States declaring war. So he didn't go through Congress to declare the war. He went through the United Nations. And so the Korean War happens in 4 different stages. The first stage, the North Koreans invaded, and they were super successful at first. They were able to push the UN into a really small area, and they contained them until backup could come with MacArthur. So that was who President Truman had told to lead the troops, was MacArthur. And then stage 2, MacArthur's there, and he orders a surprise attack on a coastal city, which is behind North Korean lines. This kind of confused everybody and got everybody in North Korea jumbled and led them to retreat. So the UN was able to chase the retreating forces. But then China gets involved. They're like, hey, North Korea's our buddy. We don't want to see them lose. So hundreds of thousands of Chinese soldiers come to North Korea, and they're like, we got your back, dude. We'll help you. So then they push the UN forces back, and MacArthur wanted to block China off, but Truman didn't want the war line to expand. So MacArthur wanted to go in and block China and block their cities, and Truman was like, I don't think we should take this war into China. I don't really think that that's a fight we want to fight. So because they were kind of butting heads, MacArthur wanted to invade China and push them back. Truman didn't. Truman relieved MacArthur of his duties and was like, I just don't think this is working out anymore. So then the 4th stage, the UN forces, they push North Korea back to this 38th parallel. That's what you're going to hear a lot in your reading. That's the division line between North and South Korea. So they keep going. Now we're in North Korea, now we're in South Korea. Now they're kind of just at a standoff, and there's lots of small battles in the last 2 years of the war. And so after, we've got these 2 years where it's just small battles, nobody's really getting the upper hand. Now the president is President Eisenhower, and so he negotiates a truce with Korea. And this happens in 1953. And so what they did was they set up a demilitarized zone in between North Korea. So it's kind of like a buffer zone. And it was, you don't come in, we won't come in. We're separated. You do your thing, North Korea. South Korea is going to do their thing, and we're going to be okay. So it was a definite separation, and the truce said that no military from either country can come into this zone, can come into this buffer. So it didn't really end the war, but it put a pause to it. And so there's still a demilitarized zone. North Korea is still communist. South Korea is still, they have a democratic government. They have a very strong economy. They've got high standards of living. South Korea is doing good. North Korea is under communist control. They've got a harsh dictatorship. They've had a lot of famine. They've had a lot of shortages of goods. They've got a really big lack of civil rights. But anybody who complains about not having food, or not having civil rights, they normally then have to go to prison, spend their life in prison. They might lose their life. So North Korea is not really a place you want to be. South Korea is doing really well. We still have that demilitarized zone, but knowing that at any time that truce could be broken. So there are still U.S. military, there's bases in South Korea. The U.S. military is still training South Korean soldiers and defense forces, so they're helping them prepare in case anything were to happen.